Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Sabo.
Greetings, everyone. Ashton Sebo here. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. Today we begin part 2 of our 2-part mini-series on learning to accept life as it is. In part 1, which is episode 17 of the Savannah Podcast, we explored the story of Nachiketas and Yama, the Lord of Death. We learned how the secrets of death allow us to more fully embrace life. If you haven't already listened to that episode, I encourage you to do so. Today's episode will focus on a story of Shiva and an old woman who welcomes a strange guest into her home. And while this episode will continue our conversation on how to surrender to life, to accept life as it comes, it will also touch on a topic that, having lived abroad for so many years, I find quite fascinating. And it's all about hospitality, about how we deal with strangers in our culture. I see memes on social media all the time joking about what people do these days in America when the doorbell rings. Perhaps 20, 30 years ago, people would get excited when the doorbell rang. But now, if the doorbell rings with an unexpected guest, people literally turn off their TV, get really silent and still, and try to pretend they aren't home until the person leaves. Even more than that, look how we treat strangers in our culture. It's that old thing like stranger danger. Now, I'm not even talking about what we tell children in our culture, but how grown adults treat strangers. Now, as a heavily tattooed, often oddly dressed man, I can attest to the various ways I get treated in particular cities or states within the United States. When I walk into a restaurant or a store, or even when I'm walking down the street. As a contrast, in countries like India, I still get plenty of stares and looks. I even get crowds of people following me because of how I look. I've been on bus rides for 8+ hours and had people literally stare at me the entire time. But the hospitality that those same people offer is astronomical. If I needed something, help, an answer to a question, water, food, a place to sleep, I have no doubt that I would be welcomed with open arms into most homes there. In India, it seems to be more of a form of curiosity than anything else. There's not a darkness or a heaviness to it. There's not a mistrust just because I'm a weird-looking stranger. We have a programmed fear of strangers in our culture. We have a programmed fear of unexpected guests. Who dares actually come to a house and knocks on a door or rings a doorbell these days? Everyone calls or texts when they're outside. So when something like that happens, it triggers this weird panic in people. And I really love how so many other cultures emphasize the importance of treating strangers well, of welcoming them into your home. I remember traveling around the mountains of Peru and how wonderfully kind and welcoming everyone was. It's something that's missing from much of our modern American culture, especially urban culture. Now, perhaps you find a bit more hospitality in the countrysides, but there's still a huge contrast from how we generally treat strangers in the West and how many other parts of the world treat strangers. And we'll see some of this embedded in our story today. Going back on track with this idea of learning how to accept life it is, as we learned in episode 17, once we no longer fear death, we're free to embrace what is. Death and how we relate to it, what we understand about it, how we feel about it, all of it is critical in our process of how we then learn to accept life. If you fear death, you will inevitably fear life. You will reject strange things, new things, unfamiliar things because of that basic primal human fear. So that has to be addressed. And death is a topic that most people don't really like to discuss. In many podcasts, we've brought up this character of Shiva. In many ways, he is representative of both death as well as the stranger. There's a wonderful story, which we will no doubt dive into in a future podcast, about Shiva's marriage to Sati and how it was rejected by Sati's father and what happened as a result. Shiva is this strange-looking mountain guy. He's got ash all over his skin, long dreadlocked hair. He's walking around in strange clothes. He's just got a loincloth on. He's got snakes wrapped around him. His friends are all sorts of unsavory types, prostitutes and beggars and rascals and so forth. He's the outsider so many of us fear, just like we fear death. Because it's strange, it's foreign, it's something we don't know, we don't understand, we're not familiar with. These stories want to encourage us to dive into these things that we fear, to get to know that which we don't know, to lift the veil and see the truth underneath things. And in that journey, in that process, we learn about life, we learn about ourselves, we learn to accept life as it is. So I think this is a good time to start our story. Now, once upon a time, there was an old woman, and she was born of a poor family, never had much. She was poor, and at this point, she was quite old, no family left, no one to care for her, and she was too frail for hard work or labor. She worked whenever and however she could, but oftentimes she had to beg for money or food because she simply didn't have the means otherwise. She had a very small hut outside a village where she lived. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over her head. It had a kitchen, a bed. It kept her warm when it was cold outside. Again, it wasn't much, but it was something. This woman spent her life as a devotee of Shiva. The mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, was her constant companion. One day, she took up the small amount of money that she had collected and she headed into town to the market, where she'd hoped that she had enough money to purchase the food for her for the whole week. And with her meager means, she was able to get enough food to make a stew that would likely last her the entire week. And thank goodness, because she'd spent all the money that she'd had. Now, it was getting late in the day, and most of the vendors at the market were closing up to head home to their families. And the old woman walked by a vendor and saw a wonderfully, perfectly ripe golden mango. And a mango was her favorite treat, and it wasn't that often that she got them. Now, she knew that she didn't have the money to buy it, but found that she was staring at the mango for quite some time. The owner of the fruit stand noticed her and asked her if she wanted to buy it. And she explained that she didn't have any money left and she couldn't afford to buy it. But the vendor saw how much she clearly wanted it and looked at the state of her clothes and body and told her, "You know what? I'm packing up for the night. If I don't sell that today, it'll likely be overripe tomorrow. Why don't you just go ahead and take it?" And the old woman lit up, and she thanked the man, and he handed her the mango. And she couldn't wait to get home to enjoy her treat. She made the walk from the village back to her small home and started to prepare a stew. It wasn't much, but she was confident that it would last her the week. The thought of the mango as her dessert helped to brighten her mood even more. And after the stew was ready, she poured herself a bowl and sat down at her small table. She said a prayer to Shiva for the food she had to eat, the roof over her head, and the life she was living. Each bite of the stew was that much sweeter because she knew that she had the mango waiting for her dessert. She didn't rush, though. She continued to take her time eating and appreciating the food she had. When the stew was finished, she enthusiastically started on the mango. And this mango, it was delicious. The best mango she had ever tasted. It was so good, in fact, that she actually stopped eating about halfway through. She wanted to continue to savor it, so she decided to save the rest for the next day so she could continue to enjoy it tomorrow. She cleaned up, got ready to go to sleep, and crawled into bed. And basking in the good fortune of her day, she quickly drifted deep into sleep. But minutes after she blew out her candles and closed her eyes, a loud knock came to her door. It startled her awake, and she quickly got up to answer the door. And when she opened it, she saw an old, sickly-looking man with a hunchback and a solid wooden cane. His clothes were dirty, and his face was noticeably weathered, but he didn't seem threatening to the woman. "Can I help you?" the old woman asked. "Yes, I'm sorry to bother you so late. I've been traveling a very long distance, and I was hoping to find a safe place to rest for the night." She was a little hesitant, but whispered a quiet, Om Namah Shivaya under her breath and invited the man in. He hobbled through the door and sat down at her table. My, oh my, it smells so good in here. Could you spare some of whatever it was that you were cooking? He asked her. And remember, this is a woman of extremely humble means. The food she had was to last her the whole week. But again, she recited Om Namah Shivaya and offered the man a bowl of her stew with a smile. Delicious, he exclaimed. May I have another? And on it went as he finished bowl after bowl, asking for another. Each time, the old woman felt her resistance. She wanted to say she had nothing left to give, but each time she whispered, Om Namah Shivaya, and offered him another bowl, until he ate up the very last of her stew. In a strange way, she was relieved, but she became horrified by what happened next. The old man spied the remnants of her mango. Oh my, is that a mango? Mango is my absolute favorite. May I have the rest of that mango to eat? Why didn't I finish that whole mango earlier, she thought to herself. She paused for a brief moment, took in a deep breath, and whispered her chant to Shiva again and said, Of course you may. He wolfed down the remaining half of the mango in a single bite. It took the woman a few seconds to digest the moment. She wanted to cry. Her favorite mango. Her food for the week. It was all gone. And she felt a certain heaviness in her body. She smiled at the man and continued to silently repeat her mantra to Shiva. The heaviness felt lifted, but her mind was still rebelling. It was time to sleep, however, so she offered the old man her bed and settled into a spot on the floor on the opposite side of the room. They fell quietly to sleep as the noises of the jungle outside offered a nighttime melody. The old woman's sleep was disturbed in the middle of the night by the man shaking her and proclaiming, Wake up! Wake up! Startled awake, she asked the man what was wrong. When her eyes finally focused, she realized the features of the man had changed. He was no longer old, hunched over his cane. He towered over her with an enormous body, and she recognized him immediately as Shiva himself. She collapsed to the floor and bowed at his feet. Bow to no one, my dear. You are coming with me. Your devotion and your willingness to offer up all that you have proves your readiness to finally make the journey home. You have reached the end of your physical journey, but your spiritual life is about to truly begin. Shiva took the old woman's hand as she stood up, and the two went off together, united as one. I love this story for so many reasons. It points to things I know I struggle a lot with in my own life, with feelings of scarcity, of not having enough, of selfishness. No matter how hard I try to organize life, to set things up in a very predictable way, life always comes up and comes in with different plans. Usually, that change is met with resistance. Sometimes that resistance boils over to full breakdown. The old woman doesn't have much. She had planned out her meals for the week with little room for error. She had just a little bit of her favorite thing, the mango. And life was barely hanging on. I feel like this all the time. Working hard to get to a place where I feel like I just barely have enough. And without getting to that place, there's an anxiety, a worry that I won't have enough. And if I don't have enough, I won't be able to be happy. So I work my butt off and I feel like, okay, I can relax. I've done it. I'm at least safe for right now. And then, boom, life comes in and mixes everything up. A new expense comes into my life, an accident, a broken computer, a big medical bill, something, whatever it is, and it throws me for a loop. I lose my center. And multiple times in this story, the old woman could break down. She could lose it. Or she could withdraw and say no to life. No, you can't have any more stew. I mean, it would be completely understandable the most, right? And it's easy to say, I only have just enough to last me for the week, and if I give you this, I could go hungry. It's easy to reject life as it comes and to attempt to protect oneself. But the moment that we close the doors to life, we close the doors of possibility and shut out the divine. It's not easy to say yes to what's happening in life. It's a lot easier to say no, but watch where that leads, to the suffering it actually causes. And the culprit here is the mind. The mind tells you that you don't have enough, that you won't have enough, that you need this or you need that. And you're either anxious to get that or anxious to hold on to what you have. And that anxiety not only makes you suffer, but stops the flow of life. Life dries out. Right? And what the mind fears, it actually creates. So what does the woman do to help her with this tendency of the mind to lead her astray? She chants, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. The mantra soothes her mind and fills her spirit. It's a reminder to all of us. And look, maybe you chant to Shiva, maybe you say Hail Marys, whatever it is, mantra as a practice helps to quiet the worries of the mind and allows us to receive life as it comes. And there are other tools, other practices that can help us with this. So we're not trying to say that mantra is the only way, but it is a tool for opening us up to life, to getting us out of our heads and into our hearts. The heart knows oneness. It knows its connection to all things. The mind attempts to divide and to separate. It's the nature of the heart and the mind. Right? The mind could easily rationalize and separate herself and the old man that came to the door. Right? He's a stranger. Don't let him in. You don't have enough food to give him. Save some for yourself. You already gave him some food. Save your favorite mango for yourself. Or he's already had enough. You don't need to give him your own bed. You can offer him the floor. Give him a little mattress, a little blanket. He'll be fine. And the mind no doubt tries this. And every time she responds with the mantra to call her back to her heart, to knowing how to respond from her heart, from that sense of oneness. And that's what these practices must do, whether it's a mantra or asana or meditation or whatever. If they're not getting us out of our head and into our heart, then it might serve us to find other practices. I know a really good sign for myself that I need to utilize my practice more is when I'm getting caught up in my head and disconnected from my heart. What do you do to connect to your heart? What practices get you out of your head and help open you to the flow of life? And we'd love to know. We'd love to be in the conversation. Contact us at Savannah Spirit. Find us on social media. We're all here to help one another move past this illusion of separation and into the experience of connection. So thank you, everyone, for listening to the show today. I hope you've learned something and remember something about yourself. One way we like to acknowledge our connection is to read some reviews we get from our listeners. And this one is from J666. And they wrote, I just found this podcast and have listened to all of them in the last few days. I'm now starting to listen a second time. They're very informative without being overbearing or dry. I have loved learning about the deities and how the principles they represent can translate into my life and my practice. If you're interested in yoga as a spiritual practice, this is very much worth the listen. Please keep making more of these fabulous podcasts. I feel like a kid sitting at the storyteller's feet, drinking in the teachings. Thank you so much. Namaste. And thank you, J666, for your kind words. To all of our listeners out there, please remember to go on to iTunes, subscribe to our show, leave us an honest review, and let us know what you think. If you enjoy our show, please share it with your friends, your family, and anyone else who you think might enjoy as well. And as always, I'd like to offer a special thank you to Zach Cooper, our sound engineer, who helps make all these podcasts come alive, and to Savannah for their support and for making these podcasts possible. Thank you to our listeners. May you all have a very present and connected moment. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.